The Dreaming Architect. In March 1992, architect David Chen woke up screaming in his Seattle apartment. He'd had the same dream for 3 consecutive nights, a massive earthquake, buildings collapsing along a specific fault line that geologists insisted was dormant. The date was always the same, January 17, 1995. Chen wasn't prone to nightmares. He was a structural engineer with 15 years of experience designing earthquake-resistant buildings. But these dreams were different. They weren't vague anxiety. They were blueprints, detailed schematics of structural failures he'd never seen before. He described the collapse patterns to his colleagues, the specific way reinforced concrete would shear under lateral force, the exact points where steel frame connections would fail, the progressive collapse sequence of a particular overpass design. His descriptions were so precise that senior engineers took notice. Chen sketched what he'd seen. The drawings showed failure modes that matched no existing earthquake in the seismic database. The structural behavior he described required ground acceleration patterns that had never been recorded. He was documenting an earthquake that hadn't happened. January 17, 1995. The Great Hanshin earthquake struck Kobe, Japan. Magnitude 6.9, over 6,000 dead. The collapse patterns matched Chen's drawings exactly. The overpass he'd sketched, the Hanshin Expressway, failed in precisely the sequence he'd documented 3 years earlier. The structural failures, the connection points, the progressive collapse, everything aligned with his nightmare blueprints down to the engineering details. Chen had never been to Japan. He'd never worked on Japanese building codes. He had no way of knowing about the specific overpass design or the unique soil conditions beneath Kobe. Yet his drawings, created in 1992, served as accurate forensic documentation of an earthquake that wouldn't occur until 1995. Seismic engineers who examined Chen's sketches confirmed they showed understanding of failure modes that weren't widely known until after the Kobe earthquake. His drawings included details about soil liquefaction patterns and resonance effects that matched the actual event but weren't predictable using 1992 seismic models. Chen never had another prophetic dream. He never sought publicity. The drawings remain in the archives of the Structural Engineers Association of Washington, a set of blueprints describing the future with impossible precision. The air disaster witness. Lindsay Walsh was 23 years old when she started having visions in May 1996. Not dreams, waking visions that appeared fully formed in her mind while she was conscious. She saw an aircraft breaking apart in midair, flaming debris falling into the ocean. The tail section number was clear. TWA 800. Walsh had no connection to aviation. She worked as a hospital administrator in Boston. She'd never experienced hallucinations or psychological episodes, but the visions were relentless, every detail sharp and specific. The aircraft type, the flight path, the moment of explosion. She wrote everything down. The date, July 17, 1996. The location, off Long Island. The aircraft, a Boeing 747. The flight number, TWA 800. The cause, a catastrophic explosion in the center fuel tank. Walsh showed her notes to a psychiatrist, concerned she was experiencing a mental breakdown. The psychiatrist found no evidence of psychosis or delusional thinking. Her descriptions were too specific, too technical for someone with no aviation knowledge. But they described an event that hadn't occurred, July 17, 1996. TWA. Flight 800 exploded over the Atlantic Ocean 12 minutes after takeoff from JFK International Airport. All 230 people aboard were killed. The wreckage fell into the ocean off Long Island. Walsh's written account, dated 6 weeks before the disaster, matched the event precisely. The aircraft type, the flight number, the location, the explosion in the center fuel tank, details that wouldn't be confirmed by investigators until months after the crash. What made her account extraordinary wasn't just the accuracy, but the technical specificity. She described the explosion mechanism in terms that matched the NTSB's final determination. She drew diagrams showing the fuel tank location and the ignition sequence. She had knowledge of 747 fuel systems that would require engineering training she didn't possess. The psychiatrist submitted Walsh's pre-disaster notes to the NTSB during the investigation. The agency acknowledged receiving the documentation, but never publicly commented on how a hospital administrator in Boston had described the disaster with technical accuracy 6 weeks before it occurred. Walsh experienced one more vision in her life. September 11, 2001. She didn't write it down. Some futures are too terrible to document. The stock market prophet. In August 1987, commodities trader Michael Richardson began keeping a private journal. He called it his future memory log. He was experiencing detailed recollections of market crashes that hadn't happened yet. Specific dates, exact point values, trading patterns that made no sense in the current market environment. Richardson had worked on Wall Street for 8 years. He understood market dynamics, technical analysis, and trading psychology. What he was experiencing wasn't market prediction based on current data. It was memory. He remembered the crash the way you remember yesterday, complete with emotional details and sensory information. His journal entries described October 19, 1987 in precise detail. The Dow Jones dropping 508 points, a 22.6% single-day decline, the specific sequence of selling waves, the panic in the trading pits, the computer systems failing under volume. He documented it all 6 weeks before it occurred. Richardson didn't trade on his knowledge. The memories felt sacred somehow, not information to be exploited, but evidence of something far stranger than market insight. He continued documenting what he remembered about future market movements. September 2008, the collapse of Lehman Brothers. March 2020, the COVID crash. October 19, 1987, Black Monday, the largest single-day percentage decline in stock market history. Every detail matched Richardson's journal entries from August. The point values, the timing, the computer failures, the panic selling sequences. He'd documented history before it occurred. Richardson's journal remained private until his death in 2019. His executor, following instructions in his will, donated the document to the Museum of American Finance. Analysts who examined the journal confirmed that entries dated August 1987 accurately described events from October 1987 with impossible precision. But the journal didn't stop at Black Monday. It contained entries about future market events written decades before they occurred. The dot-com crash, the 2008 financial crisis, the flash crash of 2010. Each entry detailed and specific. Each entry dated years before the events. The final entry in Richardson's journal was dated March 2019, 1 month before his death. It described a market crash in March 2020 triggered by a global pandemic. Specific details about circuit breakers triggering, oil prices going negative, and the Fed implementing emergency measures. He died before he could see if this last memory would prove accurate. It did. The Tsunami Child. Tilly Smith was 10 years old during Christmas vacation in 2004. Her family was staying at a resort in Phuket, Thailand. On the morning of December 26th, she stood on the beach watching the water recede. She'd seen this before, not in real life, in memories that shouldn't exist. Tilly told her parents that a tsunami was coming. She described the warning signs, the water drawing back, the unusual wave patterns, the sound that would come before impact. She knew these things with certainty. She'd experienced them before. Somehow, her parents listened. Her father, a teacher, recognized the conviction in her voice. They evacuated the beach. The hotel staff, skeptical at first, began clearing other tourists. Within minutes, over 100 people were moving to higher ground based on a 10-year-old girl's impossible knowledge. The wave hit 15 minutes later. The Indian Ocean tsunami, one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. Over 230,000 dead across 14 countries. The beach where Tilly's family had been standing was submerged under 30 feet of water. Everyone who evacuated based on Tilly's warning survived. The beach section they'd cleared had no casualties. in areas just a few hundred yards away. Hundreds died. After the disaster, researchers interviewed Tilly extensively. She described her knowledge as memory rather than education. She'd studied tsunamis in school 2 weeks before the vacation, but her knowledge went far beyond a geography lesson. She described the sensory experience, the smell of the air, the sound of the water, the feeling of the ground vibrating. She remembered surviving a tsunami she'd never experienced. Scientists studying precognitive phenomena examined Tilly's case extensively. Her description of the warning signs was accurate and detailed, but her knowledge included elements she couldn't have learned from a classroom lesson. She described the wave's approach speed, the temperature change in the air, and the specific sound frequency that preceded impact. Knowledge that required direct experience. Tilly saved over 100 lives because she remembered a future that hadn't happened yet. Or perhaps she remembered a future that had happened in another timeline, one where she didn't warn anyone, one where she experienced the disaster instead of preventing it. She hasn't had another precognitive memory. She's now in her 30s, working as an environmental scientist. She doesn't discuss the tsunami often. Some memories of the future are better left unexplained. The bridge engineer. In 1965, civil engineer William Jameson submitted a detailed report to the Minnesota Department of Transportation. The report described the structural failure of the Muir 35W Mississippi River Bridge, the exact failure mode, the specific gusset plates that would collapse, the date, August 1, 2007. Jameson's report was filed and forgotten. He was considered eccentric by colleagues. He claimed to have memories of bridges collapsing decades in the future. He documented these memories with engineering precision, creating failure analysis reports for disasters that hadn't occurred. The I-35W bridge wouldn't be built until 1967. Jameson's report was dated 2 years before construction began, yet it contained accurate specifications of the bridge design, identified the critical weakness in the gusset plate connections, and predicted the exact failure sequence that would occur 42 years later. August 1, 2007. The I-35W bridge collapsed during evening rush hour. 13 people died. The bridge fell into the Mississippi River in sections, precisely matching the failure sequence Jameson had documented in 1965. NTSB investigators determined that undersized gusset plates had failed under load, causing progressive structural collapse. The specific gusset plates, the exact failure mode, the progressive collapse sequence, everything Jameson had described decades earlier. After the collapse, a structural engineer reviewing historical documents discovered Jameson's 1965 report in the state archives. The document contained engineering calculations that accurately predicted the load conditions that would cause failure. It included diagrams showing the critical connection points. It provided recommendations for reinforcement that, if implemented, would have prevented the collapse. Jameson had died in 1984, 23 years before his prediction proved accurate. His personal files contained similar reports about other infrastructure failures. Some had already occurred. Others described collapses scheduled for dates still in the future. One report, dated 1972, described the collapse of the Morandi Bridge in Genoa, Italy, dated 46 years before the actual collapse in 2018. The failure mode matched Jameson's description precisely. Jameson's archive contains 47 structural failure reports. 32 describe collapses that have already occurred, each with impossible accuracy. 15 describe failures dated for future years. Civil engineers who have examined these reports find them technically sound. The failure modes are plausible. The structural analysis is correct. Some of those predicted dates are approaching. Engineers are watching. The Pandemic Journal. Dr. Sarah Mitchell started her journal in June 2018. She called it her chronicle of memories that shouldn't exist. She was remembering a global pandemic. Specific details about a coronavirus outbreak that would shut down the world. She documented everything: patient symptoms, transmission patterns, government responses, medical interventions. Mitchell was an infectious disease specialist in Toronto. She understood epidemiology and viral outbreaks. What she was experiencing wasn't professional speculation about possible pandemics. It was memory. She remembered living through it. The fear, the isolation, the specific progression of the disease. Her journal entries described December 2019, a novel coronavirus emerging in Wuhan, China. The specific symptoms: fever, dry cough, loss of taste and smell. The cytokine storm in severe cases. The unusual transmission patterns. Asymptomatic spread. The R0 value between 2 and 3. She documented the global response. Lockdowns, border closures. The specific timing, March 2020. She described the economic impact, the shortage of personal protective equipment, the ventilator crisis, the debate over hydroxychloroquine, the development timeline for vaccines. She wrote about Zoom fatigue and social distancing and flattening the curve, concepts that didn't exist yet. December 2019. A cluster of pneumonia cases appeared in Wuhan, China. COVID-19. Everything Mitchell had documented 18 months earlier began unfolding exactly as she'd described. The symptoms, the transmission patterns, the global response, the timeline. Every detail matched her journal entries. Mitchell shared her journal with colleagues in March 2020. The dated entries from 2018 described events that were occurring in real time. Her documentation of treatment protocols matched emerging medical understanding. Her descriptions of government responses aligned with policies being implemented worldwide. What made her account extraordinary was the specificity of medical details. She'd described the virus's spike protein mechanism before the virus was identified. She'd documented the cytokine storm pathology before doctors observed the pattern. She'd written about long COVID symptoms before the condition was recognized. Mitchell's journal contained information that shouldn't have been accessible in 2018. She described the effectiveness of different treatments, the timeline of vaccine development, and the specific challenges of mRNA vaccine distribution. Knowledge that required lived experience of a pandemic that hadn't started yet. The journal's final entries described 2023 and 2024. The endemic phase, variant evolution, the long-term health impacts, all written in 2018, all proving accurate as time passes. Mitchell continues her infectious disease work. She hasn't had memories of other future events, just the pandemic, as if she'd lived through it before in another timeline, then came back to document it before it began. The Technology Witness. In 1994, software engineer James Patterson wrote a detailed technical specification for a device that didn't exist. He called it the iPhone, a touchscreen smartphone with mobile internet, GPS navigation, and integrated camera. The document was dated March 1994, 13 years before the actual iPhone's release. Patterson's specification wasn't vague futurism. It was a product requirements document complete with technical details, user interface mock-ups, and feature descriptions that matched the 2007 iPhone with disturbing accuracy. He described multi-touch gestures, the App Store ecosystem, and specific features that wouldn't be implemented for over a decade. The document included detailed UI sketches, a grid of app icons, a slide to unlock mechanism, the specific resolution of the display, the integration of an iPod-style music player, descriptions of features like FaceTime, iMessage, and Siri using different names but identical functionality. Patterson showed the document to colleagues at the software company where he worked. They found it interesting but implausible. Mobile technology in 1994 couldn't support the features he described. The processing power, the battery technology, the cellular data infrastructure, none of it existed. His specifications described a device that was technically impossible. January 9, 2007. Steve Jobs unveiled the iPhone. Patterson watched the presentation with a sense of déjà vu that went beyond ordinary coincidence. Every feature Jobs demonstrated, Patterson had documented in 1994. The user interface, the multi-touch controls, the mobile Safari browser, the visual voicemail, the integration of iPod, phone, and internet device. Patterson's document, dated March 1994, described the iPhone's feature set with approximately 85% accuracy. The remaining 15% contained features that wouldn't appear until later iPhone generations. He'd described facial recognition unlock, wireless charging, augmented reality capabilities, features that Apple wouldn't implement until the iPhone X in 2017. Technology historians who examined Patterson's 1994 document found it technically sound given future development trajectories, but impossible given 1994 knowledge. He'd described capacitive touchscreen technology that wasn't commercially viable. He'd specified battery life requirements that required lithium-ion improvements that wouldn't occur until the 2000s. He'd outlined mobile data speeds that required 3G networks not yet deployed. Patterson's archive contained other technology specifications. A 1996 document describing streaming video services, essentially Netflix. A 1999 specification for voice-activated AI assistants. A 2002 document outlining cryptocurrency systems that wouldn't appear until Bitcoin in 2009. Each document demonstrated detailed technical knowledge that predated the technology's actual development by years or decades. Each specification proved accurate when the technology eventually emerged. Patterson died in 2015. His estate donated his technology archives to the Computer History Museum. The documents remain on display. Specifications for the future written years before anyone else imagined them. The disappeared photographer. In September 2010, photographer Elena Vasquez returned from a 3-day camping trip in the Colorado Rockies. She brought back 247 photographs. None of them showed places that existed in 2010. They showed places that would exist after major climate change events that hadn't occurred yet. Vasquez's photographs showed familiar landscapes transformed by catastrophic environmental changes. Denver under floodwaters. Coastal California submerged. The Great Salt Lake completely dried. Each image was dated and geotagged with metadata that confirmed they were taken during her September 2010 camping trip. The photographs weren't manipulated. Digital forensic analysis confirmed the images were captured with Vasquez's camera during the dates in question. The lighting, shadows, and astronomical features in the images matched the September 2010 timeframe. But the landscape showed environmental conditions that didn't exist. Environmental scientists who examined the photographs found them consistent with climate models predicting conditions for 2040 to 2050. The water levels, the vegetation patterns, the erosion features. The images showed ecosystems that had experienced decades of climate change. Yet the metadata proved they were captured in 2010. Vasquez described the experience as stepping into the future. She'd hiked familiar trails and found herself in transformed landscapes. She'd photographed what she saw, assuming she was experiencing some kind of hallucination. Only when she returned home and saw the photographs did she realize she'd documented actual future conditions. One photograph showed a date carved into a memorial stone, September 18, 2042. The memorial commemorated victims of a catastrophic flood that hadn't occurred. Vasquez had photographed evidence of a future disaster. Another image showed a weather station recording temperature data. The station existed in 2010, but the recorded temperatures were 8 degrees higher than current readings. The date display on the station showed September 2010, but the climate data represented decades of warming. Vasquez's photographs included images of infrastructure that didn't exist in 2010. Solar farms in specific locations, seawalls protecting coastal communities, relocated towns built on higher ground. She'd documented humanity's adaptation to climate change before it happened. Climate researchers created detailed analyses of Vasquez's photographs. The environmental changes shown were consistent and scientifically plausible. The vegetation succession patterns matched decades of ecological change. The erosion features required years of exposure to altered weather patterns. In March 2015, Vasquez disappeared during another camping trip in the same area of Colorado. Search teams found her campsite undisturbed, but never found her. Her camera was gone. No trace of her was ever discovered. Some researchers theorize she stepped into the future again. This time, she didn't come back. The memory transfer patient. In 2008, cardiac surgeon Dr. Robert Kim performed a heart transplant on a 41-year-old man named David Foster. The surgery was routine. The recovery was normal. Then Foster started remembering things that hadn't happened yet. Specifically, he remembered events from the future that his organ donor had apparently experienced. The donor had been a 33-year-old woman killed in a car accident. Foster knew nothing about her. Standard transplant protocol kept donor identities confidential. But after the surgery, Foster began experiencing vivid memories of events he'd never lived. Events dated after his transplant surgery. Events that hadn't occurred yet. Foster documented these memories carefully. He described a specific concert at Madison Square Garden, December 15, 2010. He provided details about the performance, the set list, the technical difficulties that would occur. He'd never attended concerts. He had no interest in the music. But he remembered being there, remembered the experience from the donor's perspective. December 15, 2010. The concert occurred exactly as Foster had described it 2 years earlier. The set list, the technical problems, the specific songs. Every detail matched his documented memories. Foster experienced multiple episodes of future memory over the following years. Each memory was vivid and detailed. Each came from the perspective of his donor. Each described events after the date of her death and his transplant. He was receiving memories of a future his donor would have experienced if she'd survived. Medical researchers studying the case theorized that Foster might be experiencing cellular memory from his transplanted heart. But cellular memory theory suggested memories from the donor's past, not the donor's future. Foster was remembering events that neither he nor his donor had experienced. He was accessing a timeline where she'd survived. One memory proved particularly disturbing. Foster remembered his donor's perspective watching his own funeral. He described the church, the attendees, the eulogy. The memory was dated March 2019. Foster was alive and healthy in 2018 when he documented this memory. March 2019. David Foster died of complications from transplant rejection. His funeral occurred exactly as he described it months earlier. The church, the attendees, the eulogy. He'd remembered his own death from his donor's perspective. A perspective that shouldn't have existed because she'd died 11 years earlier. Foster's documented memories, recorded by his therapist, described over 40 future events between 2008 and 2019. 37 proved accurate. 2 haven't occurred yet according to their documented dates. 1 describes an event scheduled for 2026. Dr. Kim, the transplant surgeon, keeps Foster's memory journal in his private files. He's performed over 500 heart transplants in his career. Foster is the only patient who remembered the future through someone else's perspective. Someone who died before that future occurred. The Disappeared City. In July 2003, urban planner Rebecca Torres submitted her master's thesis documenting the complete layout of a city district that didn't exist. She called it the Hudson Yards Development. She provided detailed architectural plans, infrastructure specifications, and zoning documentation for a massive urban renewal project in Manhattan that hadn't been proposed yet. Torres' thesis included street layouts, building heights, park designs, and transit connections. She described specific architectural features of buildings that hadn't been designed. She provided pedestrian flow analyses for public spaces that hadn't been planned. Her documentation covered 28 acres of Manhattan's West Side with precision that suggested she'd studied completed construction rather than imagining future development. The detail was extraordinary. She specified the exact location of the vessel, a distinctive honeycomb structure that would become the development's centerpiece. She described the 7-train subway extension, including station layouts and platform configurations. She documented the Highline Park integration, the retail spaces, the residential towers, everything. In 2005, the Hudson Yards development was officially announced, a massive urban renewal project on Manhattan's West Side. As construction progressed over the following decade, the development matched Torres's 2003 thesis with disturbing accuracy. The building locations, the architectural styles, the infrastructure, the public spaces. She'd documented the entire project 2 years before it was publicly proposed. Torres's thesis advisor, Dr. Michael Chen, kept detailed notes about his student's project. Torres claimed she'd seen the completed development, not in plans or renderings, but in person. She'd walked through Hudson Yards. She'd visited the vessel. She'd shopped in the retail concourse. She'd experienced the completed project before it was conceived. Dr. Chen initially believed Torres had somehow accessed confidential planning documents. But in 2003, those documents didn't exist. The Hudson Yards development wasn't in the planning stages. The site was still active rail yards. No architectural firms had been commissioned. No designs had been created. As Hudson Yards opened in phases between 2012 and 2019, Torres's thesis proved to be an accurate blueprint. The vessel opened in 2019. Its design matched Torres's 2003 drawings. The retail spaces, residential towers, and office buildings aligned with her documentation. She'd provided a complete site plan 16 years before construction finished. Torres's thesis included one building that doesn't exist yet, a super-tall residential tower on the development's northeast corner. Her plans showed detailed specifications: height, floor count, architectural features, expected completion date, 2024. Construction on that tower broke ground in 2022. The design matches Torres's thesis exactly. Torres disappeared in 2006. She left her apartment in Chicago for a routine meeting with a client and never arrived. No trace of her was found. Her thesis remains in the Columbia University Library, a complete documentation of a future that became reality exactly as she described. Urban planning students still study her work, not as visionary design, but as something else, something that suggests she didn't imagine Hudson Yards. She remembered it, from a future she somehow visited before it existed. These 10 cases represent some of the most compelling evidence that memory might not be bound by linear time. From structural engineers who documented disasters before they occurred to photographers who captured future landscapes, the patterns suggest something extraordinary. Whether these individuals accessed parallel timelines, experienced quantum retrocausality, or somehow perceived future events through mechanisms we don't yet understand, they left behind documentation that continues to challenge everything we know about causality and time. The next time someone tells you that the future hasn't been written, remember these cases. Remember the journals, the photographs, the technical specifications, because the evidence suggests that some people don't predict the future. They remember it. If you want to learn more about temporal anomalies, check out our previous video. 10 time travelers who claim they saw the end of humanity. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to question everything they thought they knew about time. Until next time, when we find out how.